Good evening, everyone. I'm Rich Leonard. I'm the dean here, and welcome to Campbell Law. And on behalf of the law school, the Campbell Law Republicans and the Campbell Law Democrats, represented here by Marshall Conrad, head of the Campbell Law Republicans, and Jeff Cox, head of the Campbell Law Democrats, we are glad to be hosting this debate between the two candidates for Wake County District Attorney, Lauren Freeman and John Bryant. There is no more important position in our county. It's a job that's critical in every county, but because of our size and the location of state government here, our district attorney wields more power than perhaps any other state official. The skill and discretion with which that power is utilized is critical to all of us. And because we only fill the job about every 3 decades, it is even more important. I am glad to have on the stage tonight with me 2 good friends competing for this honor. Both are people of skill and integrity who would take on this position with great determination. Tonight, we'll hear them talk about how precisely they would do that. Our format is simple. I will pose the same question to each of them in alternating fashion, questions created from suggestions given to me by you, by faculty, and by alumni. And then if he or she wants, the person who first answers will be given a short rebuttal, and then we will move on. At the conclusion, each candidate will be given a couple of minutes for final remarks. We tend to conclude at about 7 p.m. with the entire set of questions and remarks. So let's begin. Ms. Freeman, what in your background and experience makes you well suited to be the Wake County District Attorney?
Thank you, Dean Leonard. And first of all, let me just thank you and the law school for hosting us this evening, and to everybody for coming out this evening. I think that I'm uniquely qualified to serve in this capacity for a number of reasons. First of all, I am the only candidate who has prosecuted a criminal case. Equally important, though, in the position of district attorney in Wake County is that office is responsible for managing, or that office has over 40 attorneys and 40 additional staff. And so the job of the elected district attorney in this county largely is to lead a team that is responsible for the prosecution of nearly 100,000 criminal cases filed annually. As your elected clerk of court, I have led successfully a team of over 150 folks responsible for marshaling through the over 200,000 total civil and criminal cases. And that management experience in the day-to-day operation of the courts is so very important. But also in that capacity, I have worked daily with Colin Willoughby, with Sheriff Harrison, with judges, to make the tough decisions, the tough resource allocation decisions, the tough decisions about the day-to-day operations of the court. And I think that's very important and makes me stand apart from Mr. Bryant.
Mr. Bryant.
Well, I think there are a lot of differences between us. One of the ones she talks about in trial experience is I've tried over 100 jury trials to verdict. Those are the most important ones that we have to deal with. It's not just whether you can try a case, it's whether you can help someone use and benefit from your experience in doing the same thing. It's nice to be at the table, but if you need a ditch dug, you need to be able to get down in the ditch and help dig it. And that's exactly what my experience brings. Even though I've not prosecuted a criminal case, I was a prosecutor for the North Carolina Board of Nursing for over 20 years. And I had in those situations, I had to try to, because those people normally couldn't afford to have a counsel with them, I had to make sure that they were treated fairly. The deal with the prosecutor is, once you take your ethical rules, those of you who are students, you'll know it's to see to it that justice is done, not merely to be a zealous advocate for the position of the state. I have also got private industry experience that I had before I went back to law school. I did not attend law school until I was 30. I was in 7 years in private industry working as when I resigned, I was the general manager of the Southeastern United States and the Caribbean Basin for a medical manufacturer. Had a lot of people that worked under me. Some management is something with which I was experienced before I even went to law school.
Ms. Freeman, anything to add?
Just that my experience spans trying cases, criminal cases, from the district attorney's office through the position of assistant attorney general on behalf of the state of North Carolina, all the way to appeals in the North Carolina Court of Appeals.
Mr. Bryant, you both have expressed a great deal of respect for our prior district attorney who held office for an unprecedented 27 years. In spite of that, in managing the district attorney's office, is there one thing that you would change from the way things were done in the prior administration?
I would give more flexibility to the assistant district attorneys, and I'd spend more time trying to work with them so that they would know how to dispose of cases in their early years, early on, and not have we have a lot of things that are clogging up the system in district court right now. I think our Superior Court division works fairly well right now, but I think we can do more. I've been accused before of desiring to cut the budget. I don't want to necessarily cut the budget that we have there, but I want to make sure that we make a good utilization of our resources when we're spending the money that we spend to prosecute the cases that are presented to us. Doesn't mean you prosecute all of them. You need to find a way to dispose of them. You need to try to find a way to make certain that what you're doing is making your society better. It's just not about processing, about having the police officers, the law enforcement people say, I'm going to flush them, you shoot them. What we need to do is not making our society better as a result of what we do, then I think we're not getting the full benefit of what you can provide in the DA's office. If we get that backlog cleared up that we've got now in district court, I would like to have the assistant district attorneys having more footprints on the fields out in the towns of Roseville and outlying areas and the neighborhoods within Raleigh. I would like them to be involved in their communities also.
Ms. Rader.
I think first, all of us who have closely watched the administration of justice in this county for the last 25 years, have to appreciate the tremendous service that Colin Willoughby gave to our county, and it's been an honor not only to work for him, but to work with him in that process over the last 8 years. But there are two things I think that I, going in, might have a little bit different emphasis on than Colin Willoughby did. First is technology, and bringing better technology to the court system has been one of the things I have worked on as clerk of court. I was partnered with a wide team of folks to bring together CJ Lee's Criminal Justice Law Enforcement Automated Data Service, which frankly was the first time that law enforcement officers had the ability to see in their car, pull up the picture of somebody from DMV who they'd stopped on the side of the road, and was groundbreaking in the area of public safety for law enforcement. There's a lot of really good case management technology out there that is currently available from the administrative office of the courts that can help us better manage our caseload. And I intend to bring that to the district attorney's office if elected. But also I think substantively, one of the things that we see so much of in the system are low-level, nonviolent offenders who unfortunately are suffering from mental illness, and that is such a challenge in our community. We have for a long time here in Wake County had a very successful deferral program for people who are first-time drug offenders, low-level drug offenders. I intend to introduce a deferral program for low-level, low misdemeanor, nonviolent offenses where the individual really what they need is kind of that carrot and stick to make sure that they stay compliant with medication, with treatment. One of the things Colin said when he left office in an interview was that was an area, the mental health arena, that he wished he had spent more time on. And I think if I have the opportunity to serve the people of this county, that's one area where I intend to make some difference.
Anything to add, Mr. Bryant?
One of the things that set Colin apart when he came to this office was he came from private practice. He did not come from government. He came from private practice, and he had a good eye on how to handle those things at that time. The county's grown, though, and they got 1 million people in this county now. If this county was a state, it would have 7 states smaller than it by population. So it's grown a lot. There's some difference that have been made. Doing the deferred prosecutions of something been going on for a long time already in this county. That's not something that's new. And a lot of times the district attorney can have an opportunity to be creative with how they dispose of cases. I'm all for teaching them how to do that, helping them with that, and giving them ideas on how to do that. That's something we've been doing for a long time, and I've been getting the benefit of it from my clients for a number of years. I've told a story on the trail about one of my clients got a second chance and grew up to be a pilot of Air Force One, Marine One for the flew the President of the United States around, almost lost his ability to be a ROTC scholar. That makes a big difference. I'm a big believer in it.
Ms. Freeman, does it matter whether Wake County has a Democratic or a Republican district attorney, and if so, why?
I have a strong commitment to leaving partisan politics outside of the courthouse. You know, these are elected positions. We do run as partisan candidates, but it is important that there be no role of partisan politics in the position of district attorney or in the position of administration of justice. You know, the DA in this county has a very unique responsibility, and that is to prosecute all campaign finance violations from across the state and also public corruption cases that might arise here in state government. Having the trust and the confidence of the people is what has been, you know, instrumental and what I've been dedicated to as your clerk of court. And that starts by helping people understand and ensuring that you are not going to allow partisan politics to be injected into your decision making. You know, interestingly, for those of you who may have followed the runoff in the Republican primary, you know, it ended up into being a debate of who the better Republican was. There's no room for that in the district attorney's office or in the administration of justice.
Mr. Bryant?
Well, actually, there is room for being a Republican if you're going to watch the dollars and cents like you're supposed to. That's one of the things that I'm glad about saying that I am a Republican for, because I have a good awareness of what my taxpayers' dollars are spent to do. And I watch them very judiciously if I'm given the opportunity to run this office and to head up this office. So I don't think there's anything in the world wrong with that. I certainly do agree, though, that there's no need, deciding who gets prosecuted based upon their political party or political affiliation, or who gets a break because of their political affiliation, should have absolutely nothing to do with the administration of justice. I certainly agree with that.
Anything to add, Ms. Freeman? Mr. Bryant, what's your view on the effectiveness of specialty courts, like our drug court, veterans courts? And in light of recent funding constraints, would you advocate for the expansion or the elimination of these courts in Wake County?
I would not advocate for the elimination of them. I would advocate for the expansion of them. In fact, even though we don't have a veterans court, I don't see why we can't start one the first day that either one of us would go in office. We can do that with given the treatment that the veterans courts and those people are special folks, deserve some additional assistance because of what they've been through. It goes right back to some of the comments about mental health issues. A lot of the mental health issues were taken care of in mental health facilities prior to now. Because of some cuts we've had in some areas, a lot of the courts and the jails are having to deal with those. Sometimes a courtroom is not the best place to deal with under just prosecuting whoever you get in there. It's not the best way to deal with the root of the problem. And I think the district attorney has to have the flexibility to be able to do that, to be able to find ways to innovate to help the person out. Like I said earlier, if we don't find a way to have our job make our society better, we're missing the boat. That's what we need to be able to accomplish, and that's what I'm prepared to try to do.
I think this is a good example of where sitting at the table over the last 8 years during what has been one of the worst recessions in our nation's history in the day-to-day operations of the court really sets me aside for Mr. Bryant, and understanding what the needs of the system are. You know, we have been approached a number of times over the last 8 years about starting various types of specialty courts. There are a lot of wonderful ideas out there. Mental health courts, veterans court, homeless court. We, and when I say we, the sheriff, the judges, Chief Judge Rader, Senior Resident Superior Court Judge Don Stevens, Colin and I, you know, we had to come together and we had to make that tough decision that under the circumstances, under the nearly $40 million that were cut from the court system in the last 4 years, that we had to prioritize to meet our statutory obligations. There are a number of assistant district attorneys here in the courtroom and the auditorium tonight, and they will tell you that the challenges in the system right now and the caseloads that they are carrying and the number of people in the courts, we have to learn and figure out how to do things more efficiently, but we also have to be able to figure out, you know, what to prioritize and what we are able to start and making sure that we're going to have adequate resources to follow through on promises that we make. You know, the legislature in the last couple of budgets cut specifically drug court. It used to be that there was state funding from the legislature for programs such as drug court. And that was something that during these difficult times, budgetary times, it had to be eliminated. And we were lucky here in Wake County that they picked up the funding for our drug court. But there currently is no money to expand. And that's why, when I talk about just some kind of a deferral program for people who have mental illness or mental challenges, that's a good example of understanding the system and what the capacity of the system can hold. There's a way we can help and do some of these things without necessarily taking court time specifically.
That's the distinction between a bureaucrat's view at things. They don't get anything done because there's not any money in the budget for it. And I think there are innovative ways to be able to do that without having to have additional funds or without having to cut staff. Ways to do that to accomplish those goals, and I'm ready to do them.
Let me turn to one of the most sensitive topics that faces any district attorney, the death penalty. Ms. Freeman, in Wake County, there have been several cases recently where juries have declined to impose the death penalty. As a district attorney with the discretion to make the determination of whether to seek the death penalty, what factors would you consider in making this decision, and how do cost, efficiency, your personal views, and the views of the community affect your decision?
I think, certainly in the role of district attorney, there is no question that the decision to try a case capitally is probably one of, if not the most difficult and important cases that you'll make. And as someone who is elected to represent the community and elected from the community, it's important to have your finger on and understand the community and what they expect in those kinds of cases. I believe that what I would look at in making a determination as to whether somebody is capitally tried or not is how heinous and atrocious that crime is. Certainly there is a list of statutory guidelines that you look at. There's a legal process you go through. But I think we're at a point in our state's history and our community's history where the appetite for the death penalty is certainly changed. And yet I think that there are cases that are especially heinous and cruel where it's appropriate to make that consideration.
Mr. Bryant?
The appetite has changed because of our recent history and our recent ability with technology to determine that a lot of innocent people have been put on death row. Now that's a very serious thing to consider. The last thing in the world, I should think, that a district attorney would want to have on his or her head would be that they put to death an innocent person. That's why that decision needs to be made very carefully. I have been involved with cases where I believed that an innocent person was convicted of a crime. But with a death penalty, you end the ability to correct the mistake. I'm sorry, wouldn't cut it. I would not be in favor of abolishing the death penalty necessarily, because I have read some cases that the people deserved it. But it would be used very, very carefully on my watch.
Following up on your recent remark, Mr. Bryant, earlier this month the judge declared Henry McCullum and Leon Brown to be innocent after they'd spent 30 years in prison for the rape and murder of a child in Robeson County. Would you view your obligation as a district attorney to include rooting out other cases of actual innocence that may have occurred in Wake County in past years? And do you have any plans for implementing such a process of reviewing past convictions?
It wouldn't bother me one bit to review past convictions. If new evidence came to light, it would not bother me at all. I think that's what your obligation should be. At the time that you procure a conviction, that evidence with which you use to convict someone might have been the best that you had at the time. But if new technology arises and you have an opportunity to look at something on a second occasion, then I think it's your bound duty as not just a district attorney, but as a human being. It's your duty to try to make sure that the person whose liberty has been deprived from them is given back to them, if that's what you need to do. So I don't have any problem at all with those things and looking at them again and considering all the factors that are necessary. You can't go back and plow the same field over and over again. I understand that, but there are circumstances where things need to be looked at, and I think that the Innocence Commission has done a good job in revealing those cases, but the cases that we hear about are very few. There are a lot of cases that that organization has looked at that have been left undisturbed.
Ms. Freeman?
I think it's important, first and foremost to point out that, and I heard Mr. Bryant say it earlier, I think we both are absolutely in agreement that the job of the district attorney is to seek justice and not to win at any cost. And I believe, if elected, I would be committed to that principle. The law has changed significantly over the last 20, 30 years since those cases that were most recently in the news, and in a good way, frankly. We have much stricter standards on how we maintain DNA evidence across the state. We have much stricter standards on recording interviews or interrogations of individuals who are in custody and charged with certain offenses. And working with law enforcement in the Attorney General's office, I was in the law enforcement liaison section and did a lot of training of law enforcement across the state, and making sure that they are aware of some of these changes and that they're following appropriate procedure is so very important. But I think that at the end of the day, we have to think about the fact that in certain cases, you think about the Greg Taylor case, which is one that actually happened here in Wake County. And in that particular case, our district attorney made the decision to allow that process to play out. I think there will certainly be circumstances where DNA evidence shows that unfortunately we may have convicted the wrong person. And as DA, you have to stand up and make the tough decision and let that person go. At the same time, it's important to let the process play out, because in every case there's a victim, there's a victim's family, and a jury has made that decision. And so allowing that process through the Innocence Commission, we are very lucky here in North Carolina. We're unique in having that kind of a system here.
And it was not just a victim and a victim's family in that case. Another victim was Greg Taylor. And at the time that the information came to light, when it was revealed that the evidence, which was supposed to have been blood evidence that put him in jail wrongfully for 17 years, was in fact mud evidence, it should not have been prosecuted, I don't think. And that's a tough call to make. Letting the process play out is one thing, but I think if you've got the ability to make that decision, you realize that the evidence was tainted, and that was the only evidence connecting him to the crime, you need to step up to the plate and do the right thing.
Ms. Freeman, what technological changes would you make in improving the efficiency of the district attorney's office, and how related is that to changes that would need to be made in the Wake County record keeping itself?
Right. So one of the great frustrations over the last 8 years is not having had a budget, an independent budget for technology. Because anybody who comes into the court system, those of you who are currently working in it, those of you who are students and will come into it, you will soon realize that North Carolina is far behind in general in technology. And yet we've made some really important strides here in Wake County with me as clerk. I've talked a little bit already about CJ Leads. We've also introduced, and we're one of the first counties to go online with the statewide warrant repository, electronic warrant repository, which again was a very important tool for law enforcement. So I've mentioned already the case management technology that is available. I think that's very important. And I'll continue to kind of use the bully pulpit of the position within the court to push the legislature for better technology. Ideally, someday we have a system where discovery is routinely shared electronically, where cases can be handled electronically. We deal in a lot of paper in the court system, and we need to continue to push on that front.
Mr. Bryant?
We have killed a lot of trees in managing the paper that we do in the Wake County Courthouse. I agree with that, but to say that we're behind, I don't think is an accurate statement, because we just talked in the previous question about the Innocence Commission. We're the only state in the nation, I think, that has that. So that, I think, puts us well ahead. We're having to work with the hand that the legislature's given us rather than asking for money. I won't be whining about how much money we don't have. I'll try to make sure we get our fair share, but I'm going to work with whatever it is that we get to do the things that are necessary to make sure that justice is done. I'm proud of North Carolina. I'm proud that North Carolina has an Innocence Commission. I'm proud that we're trying to get it right.
It's one thing to talk about leading a system and running an office and carrying out the administration of justice through difficult budget times, and doing that and using your resources, it's another thing to do it. For the last 8 years, I have weathered through as your clerk of court and worked daily running the court system through what was the second worst recession in our history. And we've been able to do that, and yet we've been able to make great improvements. And that's the experience that you need in your next district attorney.
Question from one of our students, Mr. Bryant. If you were elected district attorney, specifically, how would you use your prosecutorial discretion in relation to minor nonviolent drug offenses and status offenses such as underage consumption and possession?
We have to try to educate our youth to try to help them understand why it is that we don't want them to drink while the statute is there. I think we can have an outreach program to the high schools and help with that. I do agree that there's a deferral process that is in place. I've already stated that I was a proponent of it and expanding it. I think if we're trying to help those kids understand the magnitude of the decisions that they make, then they won't make as many foolish ones. We don't have any effort at this time that I know of that extends out to the communities to try to have the district attorney's office being involved in the communities other than prosecuting the cases that are presented. I think that's a great idea to do. I would intend to do that. I would intend to outreach to them, have them involved in the process. The fact of the matter is that the younger you are when you start consuming alcohol, the greater the likelihood is you're going to have a problem with it. And if you're going to have a problem with it, your family's going to have a problem with it, and you're going to have a problem with it. Everything around you has a problem with it, and it mushrooms. So I think we need to help educate. We're also, besides just being prosecutors, I think we need to be educators and involved in our community. That's what I would intend to do.
Ms. Freeman?
We've been very fortunate here in Wake County for over 20 years to have a deferral program that works very effectively in our courts. And so, teenagers who get that drinking ticket when they're at a party on the weekend or, at college have the opportunity now to go through a deferral program that involves treatment. And certainly that's something that makes sense to keep in place. It has worked effectively for a long time and is something I would continue to support. We're lucky in that former Lieutenant Governor Gardner, who's now over at the ABC Commission, is running what is probably the most comprehensive approach that we have seen in this state to addressing underage drinking among teenagers. And I think it's really important that we work collaboratively with him and with that effort to try and cut out and eliminate that kind of behavior early on.
A lot of what the behavior has been and a lot of what's going on with the disposition of some of those kinds of cases are a rigid system of a deferral. If a kid has a beer with him that he hadn't even drunk yet, he might have to do the same 75 hours of community service as some other kid who was wasted on the corner that the police had to take to the hospital to get rejuvenated. Those are two different cases. Don't need the same kind of punishment, and I think we ought to have more flexibility with the assistant district attorneys and district court to teach them how to resolve those cases so that they don't come back again. It's not a great time to educate them, those children that are in the courtroom, by inviting them to the courthouse. That's not the best time to educate them. You can work with it then, but it's not the best time to do it. The best time to do it is before they come, out in the communities, before they get there.
Ms. Freeman, Wake County has been the venue for many high-profile cases involving political figures charged with various abuses of office and breach of public trust. Generally, I think it's fair to say that the prior administration was thought to have been very even-handed with politically charged cases in the decisions of whether to seek indictment and in the prosecution and resolution of such cases. What specifically do you see as steps that you could take to assure the citizens that your administration will treat all of these political cases without bias or favoritism? And are there measures that you would advocate that would give you even greater independence in making these decisions?
I think that certainly one of the hallmarks of Colin Willoughby's career has been that ability to kind of call things down the line. And those of us who have worked under him and also, with him have benefited from that. As I've already mentioned tonight, we are in a unique position here in Wake County in that the district attorney in this county serves as the one who will prosecute campaign finance violations and political corruption. It is essential that the person who is responsible for doing that is committed to the fair administration of justice. My entire legal career has been about building a court system that we can trust. And that's what I would bring to the district attorney's office. You know, that ability to make those tough decisions even when they are not easy to do so. And so, you know, an example of that, many of y'all know, and it's been aired out both in the primary campaign and in the media, about the incident we had in our office. I had to make the very difficult decision when it came to my attention that we had some bond forfeiture irregularities of calling in the SBI on one of my employees and one of my supervisors. And yet I didn't hesitate at all, because you have to have the ability to make that decision, to do the right thing, even when it's not easy.
I agree, you shouldn't have hesitated. You did exactly what you should have done because you caught somebody in your office that was dishonest. I have not spent my entire career playing it down the middle. I've spent my entire life playing it down the middle. I was an Eagle Scout when I was 14 years of age, and I've honored that ever since. I'm proud of that fact, and I keep it today. I keep those principles that I learned in that organization today, and the ones that I learned with my family. I learned how to do things the hard way. I lost my father to a heart attack when he was 49 and I was 17. That's a hard thing to try to deal with, to overcome. It's hard to try to be supportive of your family when you have to do that. It's hard to look people in the eye and tell them what you're going to do and then do it. But you can, and that's what I've done. I've done that my whole life, not just my legal career.
Mr. Bryant, let you talk a little more about your personal experience. So tell us about a defining moment for you in your legal career.
I think one of the real defining moments for me, I was defending a gentleman, and I learned about the drug courier profile. And in that case, because of the characteristics that the young man I was defending, we were probably about the same age at that time because I was a lot younger then, but the young man that I was defending was stopped on the drug courier profile. And the drug courier profile had several indicia to it, a couple of which were whether or not the subject that was being observed was black, whether he was casually dressed, whether he was not carrying much luggage, whether he got off, cases said whether he got off the plane at the front of the plane, or got off the plane at the back of the plane, or got off the plane in the middle of the plane. So you were kind of stuck. It was just sort of, I thought, not very consistent. In researching, doing my work to try to give my client the best representation that I could, I found out that the week before, a young, black, casually dressed, wearing jewelry, young man was stopped getting off the plane early because he was in a hurry, and he turned out to be a local basketball coach on a one-day recruiting trip to Newark, New Jersey. And he was subjected to all kinds of things he shouldn't have been subjected to based upon that thin of a read. That made me recognize and realize the importance of what it takes to be prepared to represent your client. My client in this job would be the citizens of Wake County, the citizens of the state of North Carolina. I would take that same zeal that I had then to try to get to the answer and bring it to this office. That's what I've done for a quarter of a century, and that's what I'm prepared to offer to the citizens of Wake County to do now.
Ms. Freeman?
I think, as many of your students will soon discover, when you look over the span of a legal career, it's hard to go back and pick one defining moment. Hopefully you will have many moments that are noteworthy and that you carry forward and mean a lot to you. But you know, one of the things that sticks out in my mind as I sit here right now is as an assistant attorney general, I had the responsibility of going with the Gilmore family to talk to and to argue on behalf of them that the individual, the defendant who had killed their son, who was a law enforcement officer over in Johnson County, and who was eligible for parole at that point, that he should in fact not be paroled. It had been a terrible case. He had been shot and killed very violently. And dealing there and sitting there with the Gilmores and recognizing not only what their pain and their life of pain had been with the loss of this son, but also what the sacrifice of their son, who was doing his job, and was serving his community, and the great sacrifice that he had given on behalf of us. And knowing that they entrusted in me and my ability to argue on behalf of them and their family the importance of finding justice and keeping justice in that case. And that's what our prosecutors in this county do on a daily basis. And knowing that that victim's family, that officer's family, trusted me and having that relationship with them, they followed up and sent me a note, and we kept in touch for a little while I was at the Attorney General's office, and having that relationship and knowing that I was the one responsible for handling that for them was a moment of great pride for me.
And that's an assigned case that the Attorney General assigns you to represent. And doing it in private practice, you have to have the people that you represent, and the first three words of the Constitution of the United States and the first three words of the Constitution of North Carolina, we the people. You have to have them pick you. They ask you to represent them. You're not assigned. You're requested.
Ms. Freeman, as someone who was born and bred in the federal courts, one of the great differences between the two systems is that the criminal calendaring system in the state court system is largely the prerogative of the district attorney, whereas in the federal system it's generally the judges and the clerk who control the order in which criminal cases will be tried. Do you think that system works fairly when it comes to defendants, and is that the way in which you'll continue to make the courts run?
I think it's important that we as district attorneys recognize that we don't have the ability to write the law. And right now, as you stated, under North Carolina law, the district attorney is charged with the responsibility of calendaring cases. I think we've been lucky here in Wake County. Again, it goes back to being committed to building a system that the public can trust, being fair in your administration of justice and how you're handling things. And certainly I would continue to do that and continue to handle things. Now, are there things we can change about the day-to-day calendaring short of the district attorney relinquishing that responsibility? Absolutely. I think there are efficiencies that we need to look for and that we'll have to find.
Mr. Bryant?
Yes, there are some changes that can be made, and I think even though the district attorney is charged with taking care of the calendaring of the cases, a lot of times in a lot of districts within the state of North Carolina, the calendaring has been done unfairly and has been selective about which judge is going to get which kind of a case on which rotation. So whatever would happen, under my watch, it would happen fairly. It would happen as if I was doing what I was charged with doing as a prosecutor. That's to see to it that justice was done.
A bit more personal, Mr. Bryant, what was your favorite subject in law school, and who was your favorite professor and why?
My very favorite subject in law school was when I got that envelope that said I'd passed the bar. Actually, my very favorite subject, I think, was contracts in my first year of law school. I remember struggling with trying to get the concepts of even consideration, the bargain for exchange of promises. I remember finally getting it, and the light bulb came on. That's the first time that I felt the light bulb come on. I felt like I was being burned by the light bulbs most of the time in law school. But I really felt like that was the moment when I grasped that concept. That was the moment that I felt like, and I know this is a nervous time for those people here that are in their first year of law school, I felt like then that maybe I can do this. And I was able to do it and have done it for a quarter of a century now, so it will get lighter. The bulb will get lighter, not necessarily be burning you.
I think so much about what you like about law school depends on, like in any other, whether it's college or high school, to a large extent upon the teacher. And so interestingly, certainly, contracts is something that I went into law school thinking I would hate, and ended up liking it pretty well, and it had everything to do with the teacher and nothing to do necessarily with me. I think if I think about my favorite class, though, probably my favorite class would have been professional responsibility, and that's because it was taught by Ken Brown and people who are in the legal community. I know students don't know who Ken Brown is, but he is a long time and was dean there at one point, long-time professor at UNC, which is where I went to law school, and just such a fine person who really took a lot of time to talk to students, to try and pull out from us there in class, in discussion, kind of our thoughts about how do you weigh through issues, how do you find the appropriate approach and what's fair and what's right. I
thought professional responsibility was something that you ought to already know. I mean, don't lie, don't take something that doesn't belong to you, and don't ever misbehave with your clients. I mean, it always seemed pretty logical to me. So that if you live by those rules, I didn't think that the professional responsibility was something that it was all common sense. It was all made sense to me in professional responsibility. But that's one that we need to learn, because not every lawyer, once they get out, seems to have taken that course. And I'm glad that we have it, and I'm glad that Ms. Freeman and I both have taken it, and I'm sure we did both very well in that class.
Ms. Freeman, are there current plea bargaining policies, DWI, sexual assault, homicide, any other area where you think changes should be made, and if so, how?
I think one of the things that's really important when you go into any office, and certainly as clerk, one of the things I was committed to doing going in is first, getting a full view of what's happening and trying to make some assessment of where things might be changed. I don't think you want to go into an office and automatically start changing everything. Certainly, as we've already talked about, I think there's certain types of cases, again, largely, low-level, nonviolent type cases, where we need to be finding whether there are ways, especially when there's mental health issues involved, to handle those cases a little bit differently, so that hopefully those people get connected with the resources that they need, and not only is it better for the community at large from a public safety standpoint, but also better for them.
That's right.
Could you give me that question again, please?
Are there certainly.
Don't tell me you never had a student ask you to repeat a question.
I've had it asked in court more than once.
I may have been the one that asked it.
Are there plea bargaining policies, for instance, with DWI, sexual assault, homicide, or any other area that you think should be changed? And if so, in what way?
I do. I think there are some. I can't name them specifically, because I think we need to, one of the first rules of management is to make sure that you understand how it goes on from inside once you get to address a problem. I wouldn't disagree with Ms. Freeman about that, because I think to go in and make changes for change's sake would not be able, you hadn't been able really to identify the problems. I do have an advantage because I'm not coming in really from the outside, because I've been working with the DA's office for 25 years now. And Colin, when he came into office, he came from the similar background that I come from. He just had 5 years, I think, when he got elected to the DA's office, or appointed the first time, and I've had 25. But he did the same thing and looked at it, learned about it, and I think that's what you need to do first. And then if there are some modifications that need to be made that are of a practical standpoint, for instance, I don't see why that rather than having the lawyers standing in line in district court now to try to get their turn to talk to the assistant district attorney, we can't find a way to have those cases taken up to the DA's office when the clerk of court and the police officers and the judge and the other lawyers who don't have the attention of the assistant district attorney, as well as the people in the congregation that are there for their cases, are sitting to wait for something to happen. I think we can take those cases that would be ripe for plea and have them up in the DA's office, DA and the defense counsel, address those pleas and take care of them there without having everybody having to wait on them. This is one of the things I'd like to do.
Two things. First of all, I think it's vitally important that the administration of justice happen out in the open. And so while certainly it's appropriate that cases be talked about, I do think it's important that cases be disposed of in open court to maintain that public confidence in the system like we've talked about. But also, I think we would agree that it's really important that you are able to develop the discretion. There's tremendous amount of discretion that an assistant district attorney has. And so instead of having a lot of rules about you can do this, you can't do that, I think it's really important to cultivate a place where they can exercise that discretion appropriately.
Mr. Brown, what's your view about the impact of domestic violence in this community? And would you set up any special policies or priorities to handle what seems to be a growing number of cases in this area?
It is a growing problem. And I was listening yesterday to public broadcast radio, and there was a panel on talking about the NFL and its stance on domestic abuse, not just spousal abuse, but child abuse. And it was an interesting discussion. Primarily, it was interesting because one of the panel members talked about that there should be some difference between how bad the battery was, how bad the physical contact was. A light slap, this panelist said, versus cold cocking, as Ray Rice's elevator video showed. Other person on the panel said, well, if it's physical abuse, even a light slap is physical abuse. It's domestic abuse. Well, then you advance that into the problem of now Ray Rice's wife, as you've all seen, Ray Rice's wife has said it wasn't his fault, give him his job back, essentially. And other people have said he needs to be banned from the NFL forever, lose his livelihood. Now, you got a difficult thing to weigh there. And the reason that you have a difficult thing to weigh there, if a spouse, like another athlete, having seen the experience here, gets hit by her husband, is she going to be willing to tell him or tell on him if she knows he's going to lose his ability to work? Is that going to chill the ability for these things to be brought out into the open and have them discussed? That's a really complex thing, and you have to involve a lot of parties, because you don't want to have, I agree with the panelists that said any physical contact, but that's not the only way to abuse your spouse. Emotionally is a horrible thing to do to both children and your spouse. Those things need to be dealt with. That's part of what this whole combination of trying to meld everything together to be prosecuting the cases which are presented to you, and at the same time trying to make sure that you make your community better because of it. Try to make sure that you avoid the spousal abuse on both sides. Then you've got the Hope Solo issue where the female is beating up the guy or beating up her sister or whatever, whoever it was. So that is a very difficult problem to try to handle. And it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to be able to do that and get a great resolution that's going to actually make your community better. That should be the focus of what the DA's office does, though, in Wake County, and I think it can do that.
Ms. Freeman?
And domestic violence is a very serious problem in our community. Wake County 2 years ago led the state in the number of domestic violence fatalities. And that's not the kind of accolade, quite frankly, that I as a citizen of Wake County like or want to see. I have been privileged to work very closely with the community fighting against domestic violence here in Wake County over the last 8 years. I serve on the North Carolina Domestic Violence Commission. And most recently, I have been working with a new and very exciting initiative here in Wake County. Wake County got in place in the legislation to put in place a fatality review team, domestic violence fatality review team, about a year ago. And as your clerk of court, I've sat on that team, and that team is made up of law enforcement, prosecutors, people from the medical community, people from schools, child protective services. It's a collaborative team that goes back and looks at those very terrible cases that did end in the death of the victim and tries to find places where we can intervene and where things can be done differently. And those kinds of initiatives and understanding how that system works and what the different pieces are and how we can all work together is so critical to moving us forward and trying to stamp out domestic violence here in Wake County. I've been doing that work, and I'll be proud to continue doing that work as your district attorney, and I'm ready to do it on day one.
It's an interesting choice of words that she used, which helps identify the difficulty of the problem. She wants to continue fighting domestic violence. It seems to me that everybody that has an opportunity to do something right and do something good about domestic violence. I haven't sat on a board of anybody to do it, but I've dealt with it with my clients. I've tried to find resolutions for them with my clients. I've been doing that with the kids and with the spouses for 25 years. And I'm offering the opportunity to do it for the whole county.
Ms. Freeman, Wake County has experienced tremendous growth in recent years, which is seemingly going to continue. And with growth, the corresponding increase in the workload and the volume of cases handled by the district attorney. what specific steps would you take to effectively manage the growing volume of cases? And are there additional resources or statutory changes that you would advocate to allow you to continue to carry out the duties of the office despite this rapid growth?
You know, I tell people here in Wake County, we're now at 1 million people, and we hear a lot of talk about the overcrowding of the schools. We hear a lot of talk about, transit and the overcrowding of our public roadways. We don't hear as much about, the crush or the pressure on the court system. And yet, just as Dean Leonard said, as we've grown, increasingly, that is a concern. And over the last 4 years, as I mentioned before, our court system has been cut $40 million. I'm proud to serve on the North Carolina Courts Commission, and we actually had met earlier this week. And the purpose of the North Carolina Courts Commission, I was appointed to serve there by the legislature, is to try and look at exactly these kinds of issues. How can we work more efficiently? So one of the things I think we have to look at is, are there things now that we're handling in traffic court, seatbelt violations, expired registrations, those kind of things that can be handled more from an administrative standpoint. We looked last year, and there was legislation that actually reduced a number of things down to infractions. That makes it a little bit easier for things to go through the system. Looking at ways collectively as part of that kind of a group, the North Carolina Courts Commission, and making recommendations to the legislature about how things might be able to work more efficiently. It takes, again, having that experience of having been in that role and worked in that role. I think in terms of the resource needs of our actual court system here, I think it's important to point out that we are just neck and neck with Mecklenburg County, and yet they have more than 20 additional assistant district attorneys than we do. I don't think just increasing staff is the answer. I agree with Mr. Bryant, resources are scarce and hard to come by, but I do think we have to continue to find ways to work more efficiently. Again, as your clerk of court, I've had to do that for 8 years, and I will continue to do that as your district attorney.
Mr. Bryant?
One of the things that I was talking about earlier is exactly an idea to help clear that up. In a district court, you have the 30 cases. One defense counsel has 30 cases that are for plea. He has those cases taken up to an office of an assistant district attorney by appointment, negotiate the pleas there, take them back downstairs to our disposition court, plead them out in open court, takes care of the problems she was talking about with not doing anything in the open. All the negotiations for pleas now are done between the defense counsel and the assistant district attorney in those cases. It's all done that way, and it's not done in public. It's already done in private. You take it down, you plead the case in front of a judge, and the judge takes it, it's in public. That takes care of a whole lot of caseload. If you've got 2 cases you got 32 cases in defense counsel, you got 2 cases you need to have a trial on for one reason or another. You set the time when you're going to try it. You don't have to wait. You don't have to get it continued. It doesn't get marked not reached. You resolve the case. And then we can spend some time getting out into the communities and making a difference about what comes in to us in the first place. We can take a big old dent in that. And because we've got 1 million people now, we're about the size, Wake County is the population size of Montana today. The whole state. And it's concentrated right here, and it's still a big county, as Lauren and I both know. It's still a big county. Excuse me, Miss Freeman, I'm going to call you Kay. But the whole thing that we've got here is a way to be able to work this thing together and work with the citizens of the communities. We need to have some contact with them to try to make sure they don't come to the court in the first place. They don't have any sort of an aversion to seeing the police ride by. The teenage kids that I know, they'll say, here comes 5-0, like it's something that they need to be avoiding, rather than knowing it's somebody that's there to protect and serve them, and they're a part of it. And they can help make their community safer.
One final question. As the only law school in your district, can we have your firm commitment from this point forward, you will only hire Campbell graduates as district attorneys and Campbell Law students as externs?
Who gets that one first?
I believe it's your turn.
I would just figure that it would be. Exactly what I would think. I'm going to only hire qualified candidates if I'm elected. And I'm sure that nobody will graduate from here that doesn't fit the bill.
Thank you.
I think that's a good answer, Mr. Bryant.
Well, let's go with that one.
Mr. Bryant, Ms. Freeman took the first question, so I'll give you a chance for a couple of minutes to sum up.
I really think it's important in this county and for this position to have somebody that's got a lot of jury trial experience. Trying a jury trial is not something that's easy to do. I see a lot of faces in here that have done a lot of jury trials. It's not easy. It's a complicated process. You have to unfold a drama for the jury. You have to keep their attention. You have to do it with great evidence. Some of the cases that Wake County has had that have gone up and gotten reversed, we might have had a better result from that had they not been so bad about, or had they not had some evidence that wasn't questionable, and being able to have the ability to know when exactly you need to fight those fights about evidentiary matters. A lot of times I'll tell my client in a civil case in particular, I'll tell my client in a civil case, if we lose a motion trying to get something in, I tell them that's one more thing they don't get to appeal. It's one more thing that's going to have us have a cleaner record. It's one more thing that's going to protect us if we win this case. And if you're the most prepared attorney and you've done the most work and you're most ready to keep your audience, that is the jury, engaged to a conclusion, you've got the best chance of informing that jury and educating that jury about what your position is, in that case, on behalf of the state. I think it's critically important to be able to have experience in doing those things. It's not an easy job. It's not so much being a district attorney, in my experience with it for over a quarter of a century. It's not so much that the cases and the evidence are all that difficult from a technical standpoint legally. One of the most difficult things that these people at the DA's office have to do is emotional. Somebody every time is losing their liberty, they're losing their life, they've lost someone that's a victim. The emotional part that these assistant district attorneys have to go through, I think, is the toughest part of their job. They got to understand your kid's not coming back to you. You're going to lose your family member for 20 years. We can't, the victim of a crime, we can't bring you your son back. Those are hard things to deal with. And that's what we expect the DA's office to be able to do. I think that takes a lot of heart. Takes a lot of soul for your job and for your client. And in this case, your client would be Wake County, the state of North Carolina, for you to see to it that justice is done. I haven't just had that experience in the courtroom, because you can have all kinds of funny things happen to you in a courtroom. I remember I had my first jury trial, 3 months into practice. I stood up, it was before Earl Britt. And I bolted up out of my chair and said, "Objection!" And he looked at me over his glasses like I know Judge Leonard knows he would do. And he said, "Mr. Bryant, what's the basis of that objection?" He froze me right up completely. I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't think of relevance. I couldn't think of hearsay. I couldn't think of any of those evidentiary words that might have helped me. I couldn't think of any of it. So I finally stammered, "Judge, it just didn't sound right to me," and I sat down. Judge Britt thought for a second, and he said, "You know, it didn't sound right to me either, Mr. Bryant, sustained." That was my only objection the whole trial. And the reason that you have to be able to do things like that, the reason you got little stories like that to share with these people you're bringing along and helping them learn how to try a jury trial, is those things are important to know, not to lose your cool, not to lose your sight of what the long distance goal is. That's to serve your client, to serve your community, serve your county. And if you're not making it better, in my view, you're not doing your job. And that's what I want to offer you the citizens of Wake County.
Thank you. Ms. Freeman?
You know, I've spent nearly 20 years working day in, day out to build a criminal justice system that the people of Wake County and the state could trust. I have tried hundreds of cases on behalf of the state of North Carolina as an assistant district attorney, as an assistant attorney general, even all the way up to the Court of Appeals, working on briefs filed with the Court of Appeals in criminal matters on behalf of the state of North Carolina. I'm the only one who has ever prosecuted a criminal case. You know, the day-to-day operation of our court system requires somebody who is able to and willing to make the tough decisions. I have been able to do that over the last 8 years. I am committed to continuing the fair administration, the commitment to public service that I have brought throughout my career. I think, you know, the ability to have worked and the experience working with victims, the experience working with law enforcement, but most importantly, the experience of holding the public trust is so important in our leaders within the judiciary and in the role of district attorney. And that's my commitment to you as residents here in Wake County. I look forward to, it has been a tremendous honor to serve as your Wake County Clerk of Court. And if y'all so choose and I become the next Wake County District Attorney, I look forward very much to creating a legacy there that you, the public, can be proud of.
Thank you, and I want all of you to join me in thanking Mr. Bryan and Ms. Freeman for being with us tonight. And let me say that in these days of negative politics, all of us so appreciate the civility and the professionalism with which you have conducted your respective campaigns. We at Campbell aim to play a vigorous role in the political life of our community. Next Thursday will be our Judicial Appellate Forum at 5 o'clock. We will have the candidates for the North Carolina Court of Appeals. At 6, the candidates for the North Carolina Supreme Court. So feel free to come back and join us 1 week from today. We have ample refreshments in the lobby, so please feel free to stick around and enjoy. We're delighted to have had you, and we're adjourned. Thank you. Y'all are good. You've been doing this a while.
Yeah, at this point in the campaign, between a primary